It's 9 a.m. We're going to call the meeting to order. 10 a.m., I'm sorry. Can't tell you. Roll call. Doyle Williamson? We don't know where Doyle is, and we tried to call him. So
yes,
I don't know
ma'am.
what's Lee Warren?
Here.
Matt Hart?
Here.
Sean Emmerich?
Here.
Steve Reinhardt?
Here.
Barbara Evans?
She's on mute, but she's here.
Can you punch that red button?
Barbara Evans?
Oh, yes,
Barbara.
Okay, Brett Phillips?
Here.
And then can everyone else introduce themselves as we go around the table?
Jennifer Wheeler, Education Manager.
Tony Slagle, Government Affairs and Inspector Staff Liaison.
I'm Adrian Arriaga, Real Estate Commissioner. Been on the board now for 11 years, and I paid extra to be a part of this group.
Joining us, Commissioner.
Thank you so much.
Quinn Jackson, Director of Educational Licensing Services.
Mark Moore, Director of Standards and Enforcement Services.
Michael Malloy, Staff Attorney.
Kristen Warman, Deputy General Counsel.
Okay. And I guess we're good. All righty. So the second item on the agenda is the election of officers.
I'd make a nomination that we elect Diana Rose as chairman.
I'll second that.
Anybody else want to make a nomination? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All righty. So now
We did that so we don't have to move chairs.
Congrats.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so then we have a vice chair, right? Okay, any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Lee Warren.
Second.
All in favor? Anybody?
Aye.
Matt, did you have any discussion on it? All righty, so Lee is the vice chair. And we have secretary. Any nominations for secretary?
I nominate Brad Phillips.
All righty, all in favor for Brad being secretary?
Aye.
Aye.
All righty. That's everybody, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And would I go ahead and do the subcommittees now, or is that not part of this?
You can do that anytime.
Anytime?
Yeah, if you have, if you have an idea who you want to be on it, you can do it now.
I actually would like to keep the subcommittees the same as they are now, if that's okay. Just because, so we have some continuity with the standards of practice.
Okay.
So they will remain the same.
It's only been a year. All right, so agenda item 3, ratification of the minutes of the January 22nd, 2018 meeting minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look at them?
Yes. I want to apologize up front. The link I sent was an odd link, but hopefully you were able to access them otherwise and look at them.
Yeah, I didn't. Okay, so do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All righty. Everybody?
Who seconded
vote?
that?
Matt Hart. Okay, so take a vote on the motion to approve the meeting minutes. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Anybody against? All righty. So, agenda item 4 is general comments from visitors on non-agenda items only. Do we have anybody that has any non-agenda item comments? No? Shall we move on? Okay, so we'll have item 5, which is a report from the subcommittees and standards and practice met this morning.
Standards practice met this morning. We're actually waiting to set a future date based on committee structure, but we're getting
the process started, and we're looking at possibly sending out a survey to all inspectors to get input on any proposed changes to the SOPs and/or.
And do you have any time frame on when you think you want to do that?
Based on the fact that we have to get it done within a reasonable time before the next SOP re-up for that next class, ideally probably within the next year and a half.
Oh, okay. And enforcement subcommittee?
Did not meet.
Did not meet. Okay, and then the education subcommittee?
Did not
Did not
have any
meet?
actions.
Tony, is this the appropriate place for me to maybe suggest about the enforcement committee, subcommittee we talked about, maybe at least creating a time when they meet
Certainly, you're the chair, you
regularly,
could bring that up.
just so there's a review before our meeting here. I know that usually when there's no meeting of the enforcement committee, we wait for the reports, and then all of a sudden there's, a lot of questions or concerns about things that are brought up, so.
So, what she was suggesting is that the enforcement committee just have a brief meeting with enforcement prior to the committee, full committee meeting, just to talk about any issues that might come up at the full committee meeting, so that you guys are aware of them and you can vet any questions that you might have before the actual committee meeting.
No problem with that.
I think it's a good idea, because it's a subcommittee that doesn't seem to meet, but it always seems like we have questions when we get the reports. And I think that maybe it's a good idea, even if it's just before our meeting here, to be able to have a scheduled meeting.
Well, if we have the meeting
Yeah.
before,
Or,
at the main meeting, we're still going to ask,
well,
Mr. Moy,
okay,
and
so
then-
it's before this meeting, before we have a regular full committee meeting.
Right, what I'm getting at
They
is,
schedule some.
it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the purpose of having, if we have an enforcement committee meeting, is if there's something that's going through your department that you just want extra clarification on, or it's not as black and white or clear cut as it should be, then the enforcement committee meets, the enforcement subcommittee meets, and we discuss and do that. Otherwise, we pretty much just leave it up to them. But even if we have a meeting before to go over the things that they're already doing effectively, then when we have our main meeting, those questions are still going to be there.
So there's never anything on the enforcement subcommittee reports that you guys ever want to see or talk about beforehand, or there's nothing that comes up that's, I don't know how we know what's going on the enforcement until we get a report right before our meeting.
Well, if I might interject, this is Kristen, the Deputy General Counsel. It's entirely appropriate for the committee members to ask questions of enforcement about items on the report.
Okay.
And unless there's a need for enforcement to have an expert witness involved in a case, then it's really not appropriate for all of the committee members all of the subcommittee members to get involved in the weeds of enforcement cases while they're pending and going through the
Okay.
enforcement process.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thank you.
But it also, I mean, it's any enforcement related rules is also something that you have, the chance to go over. It's not just dealing with, questions about enforcement matters. It's also that committee's scope to look at any enforcement related rules. And they've done that in the past before they come to the full committee.
I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I just don't want to create a meeting where.
Right. I was just clarifying that it's broader than just them asking for information. So.
I mean, it'd be good on like the issues with the agreed order revocation, where everybody seemed to think that TREIC all of a sudden was putting the hammer down because somebody used the wrong form, and like we talked about, and revoked his license when that wasn't the case at all. But that's kind of the way it reads.
Right.
To have I don't know, maybe if we meet at least once a quarter and just say, hey, here's what we've actually processed, here's what actually happened, so that when we get questions, because inspectors go on the website, look up who's on those subcommittees and email me or call me at 11 o'clock at night and ask me why somebody's license got revoked, at least I have an answer for that. Wouldn't hurt, but I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. I just don't want to overcomplicate the process and create a meeting where we really
Right.
Right.
Okay, well, I wasn't trying to do that either.
Yeah.
Michael Malloy, if we have questions, we, call out to Brad or whomever, if we have questions about what's appropriate in certain situations with our investigation and everything, so, we don't go blindly at this, and we try to keep a standard. We've been trying to do that consistency, over the past 5 years in regards to the type of punishment that we provide in certain situations.
Well, I'm not trying to create a meeting or create work. I just feel like,
But,
this committee.
like Tony mentioned, if you guys want to revisit the penalty matrix, there may be some issues in regards to you feel that the fine's too harsh in some situations versus others. That's something that we can definitely explore.
I mean, it may not be a bad idea to discuss collection, attempts or opportunities or ways that we might be able to enforce actions that have been taken. For instance, people that we have fines levied against.
Oh, well, that's the job of the Attorney General if
Right, but
it's
if we
figured
can,
out.
I mean, that might be a good discussion item.
Then, people that have fines, they have to pay us. The people that have outstanding fines, they're usually not licensed with us, so.
thank you guys, sorry to create confusion. I was just throwing that out there. Alrighty, agenda item 6 is staff reports. So administration and management services first.
If you don't, I do have something. I just wanted to let the committee know, I know some of you are aware that I went and spoke to the Central Texas chapter of TREIC on Tuesday, and just gave them a brief sort of overview of what you guys do in a regulatory structure, as well as talked about sunset with them and encouraged them to come and be active. And then also, this is a future set or date set in the future, but TREIC also asked that we be involved in their next conference, which is in September, and we've agreed to do that. So we'll have a table there for any inspectors who are attending to come talk to us about issues. I'm going to likely be me sitting there, but you guys can stand seeing me again. But yeah, so, and I'd like to encourage anybody. We're open to that. We really want to, engender a relationship here. So if there's any other chapters of TREIC or other associations or any groups of inspectors that would like us to come and talk about specific things, just let us know. And if we can make it work, we'll make it work.
What about the listening tour?
Oh, thank you, Brad. So we also have our strategic planning listening tour, which is starting next month. The dates
Starting Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, first one's Thursday, Fort Hood.
It is next month.
Yeah.
Sorry,
This
that's
coming
true.
Thursday, which is-
Thursday, and it's published on the website. I don't think I have the website up, but anyone who's interested, I left cards up here for anyone who wants them. You can reach out to me. I'll if you can't get it on the website for some reason, I'm happy to email you the schedule. But we're going to be traveling around the state, we're working our strategic plan, as well as we have Sunset coming up. So it's basically a venue for stakeholders, that's license holders and the public, to come and address any questions, issues, concerns to staff, so that we know moving forward how to prepare and plan and address those. So we're all over the state, as well as there's going to be 2 done over the internet, sort of live, interactive, meaning you can ask questions and we'll answer them in real time. So.
And there's also an opportunity, there's a link on the TREIC website for you to submit your comments online. There's a survey so if you cannot make it in person to one of the strategic planning tour stops, you are welcome to submit your comments online.
Yeah, the big emphasis is we want people involved, so please make an effort at least to look at it. If you can attend one, that's great. If you can look at the one online, if you can submit comments, but we really would like people to get involved and let us know.
It does have the first 9 here, and they're all over from Galveston, Bryan College, Fort Worth, Corpus, El Paso, and 2 of them are online Facebook
right.
Live.
That's for those that can't make them first. So there's lots of opportunities to give us input.
Okay.
And
So
the
please
closest
do.
one is going to be Fort Hood for everybody this Thursday
Okay.
to this area.
If you're in the
And they've changed it from the last time he did that strategic tour. he changed a lot of those venues to try and accommodate, to get everybody.
different locations.
involved.
Yeah, we do that every other year. We move it around, so we make sure we, at least every 4 years, we hit one part of the state. So, thank you.
Standards and enforcement services.
So this is the updated report. The one that was in the materials was the previous report that was given in January. So this is an updated one. We've just did 4 disciplinary actions since the last materials, and that's reflected on the first page. And then the remaining 2 pages is, excuse me, the full fiscal year 2018 disciplinary actions.
Why do we have one from September 2014?
Sorry, hold on.
Oh, that was probably typo. 2017.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I closed that. I closed that out. Does anyone have any questions about it?
I guess not.
If you do, I'll pull it back up. Sorry about that.
So any questions about committee members for standards and enforcement? Okay, and so we'll move on to education and licensing.
Gwen Jackson, Director of Education and Licensing Services. I'd like to first ask, Jennifer, did you make an announcement in regards to CE?
I did prior to the meeting. I can do that again. Anybody seeking CE credit for meeting, this meeting today, be sure that you've already signed in. You'll also need to sign in for attendance at the meeting, and that's for Tony's records. You'll also need to stay for the entire meeting and sign out when we're done.
Thank you.
And Jennifer, the credit is only for the amount of time the meeting. If it's an hour and a half, it's an hour and a half
Right.
credit, correct?
No, if it's an hour and a half, it's an hour credit.
Okay, but,
Right. We don't do half hours.
okay.
It's up to 2 hours.
Up
So if
to
it
2
goes over
hours.
2 hours, you just get
You get
2
2
hours.
hours.
Yeah.
And they don't round up.
Right.
Is that a 4-hour and a renewal period?
It's
Is that-
so the way the commission meeting works is it's 1 4-hour period every other year. The way this meeting works is it's 2 hours every year, up to 2 hours every year. So it's the same, it's 4 hours every
Yeah,
year.
because I think I read in the
Boy, I
rules,
was
it said
sweating
4
my
hours.
hours in.
Up to,
Up to 4
per
hours.
license renewal.
Yes.
term.
That's what I was thinking.
Right. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you. This first report is a report for January. This is an updated report from that's in your materials. And this report provides you with the fiscal year comparisons for applications received, licenses issued, as well as renewal activity. And as you can see, the total original applications we received and processed over, well, approximately 326, which is 22 less than we did previous period in 2016. Total licenses from original applications issued were 323. Licenses issued from reinstatement applications were 7. And then at the bottom portion of this report is the renewal activity. And you can see that 333 inspectors have renewed between the period of September and January.
Any questions?
Any questions?
The information we got in our packet was a month old, I think.
Yeah.
'Cause I have December's and not.
No, yeah, but that, as the email said, she was going to present, Jangon was going to present updated information, because that's all we had at that point. The reports hadn't been run yet.
Can we get those emailed to us?
Yes, sir.
And the next report reflects the total number of license holders and registrants. And there in the center portion, those are the statistics for our inspectors. And as you can see, as of January, there were 4,086 compared to 3,656 in January of 2017. So you'll see that we've increased our total inspectors by 430 over the course of that year. And then questions on this report.
Any questions? No, ma'am. Thank you.
The next report is our report on inspector examination activity. You can see the total number of examinations taken, which is the third line item down for each each type of inspector. You can see on the left-hand side is for 2018, and on the right-hand side is for 2017, so you can compare year to year. And if you move down to the very last line item, you'll see the first attempt pass rate comparisons. You see that real estate inspector's first attempt pass rate was 29.4. It was 47.3% for the professional inspector compared to the totals or percentages on the line. So you can see that we've had a decrease in percentage for real estate inspector. Any questions on this one?
Question. Ed, is there still a difference between the first-time pass rate on the national and on the state?
Is there still a difference?
It's spread out.
I'm going to ask you to start over. Just state your name first.
Eddie, with Legal State School in Dallas.
Okay.
The question is there still a breakup between the first-time pass rate on the state portion and the national portion? Is it broken up?
Well, there are two parts to the exam, and there's the national part and there's the Texas state part.
Okay.
And if you're asking if I have a breakdown of the first-time pass rates for the national versus the state,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
do not have that with me,
Okay.
but I can provide it to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. And the next report is a report of our instructor distribution, which provides for us the total number of instructors that we have year-to-date. Far right corner is what our totals were as of the end of January of this year. And the bottom half of this report shows you the instructor distribution. So you'll see that our totals are staying relatively consistent. Sometimes we have fluctuations because, there are licenses or approvals that expire.
That doesn't have inspector distribution. We're looking for the ICE electives, the qualifying in ICE, and Texas SOP and the ride-along course.
Okay.
So if you'll refer to what's in the materials
For that,
for the inspector instructors.
okay, and that will be as of January. Thank you, Chris. As of December.
Scroll back over, Tony, you cut off December.
Oh, I'm sorry, the screen and the screen aren't the same.
These are the totals as of the end of December. And I apologize for the January, those typos there. We had to redo it. We're trying to make the print larger and present you with a report that
Reformat.
a little better for you to see, and that's what there is.
Thank you.
Any questions about this report from the committee members? Good. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 7, we have a few people that have public meeting comments. Agenda item 7 is discussion regarding a possible legislative fix for all inspector consumer recovery issues to be recommended as part of the agency's sunset review, including A, insurance requirements for inspectors. I'm just going to read the topics. B, real estate inspection recovery fund, and C, contractual limitations of liability. So we're going to start with A, which is insurance requirements for inspectors.
And I just wanted to make sure this was the motion that was adopted unanimously at the commission meeting that asks you guys to look at these issues. That's why it's on the agenda now.
Right.
Well, and also this was the recommendation that the committee had
Correct.
for the commission meeting.
Right.
And the commission adopted the committee's recommendation.
Okay, so this is just up for any questions that you have, but.
So insurance requirements for inspectors, I think a lot of this is, this topic is revolving around the fact that we have the clause or an issue with a clause within or without limits. Our current requirements have a $100,000 limit and don't specifically spell out any issues if the fees or attorney's fees or anything like that go over that 100,000, where the consumer would be paying the difference from. So I'm going to go ahead and open the topic for discussion amongst the committee.
I think we need to go back a step farther than that.
Okay.
When the statute came through, it said liability insurance policy. It never said professional. And it actually went through a process, and TREIC had determined, I believe it was TREIC attorneys had determined that it actually meant professional liability insurance as opposed to general liability insurance.
Yes, and to clarify that
Right.
process, at the time, the commission requested an opinion from the Attorney General's office.
Right.
And the Attorney General's office said that because this was the commission statute to enforce, then the commission could interpret what was meant by the requirement. And as a result, the commission, working with the Texas Department of Insurance, determined that this was a professional liability policy or an errors and omissions policy as opposed to a general liability policy. So currently, the commission interprets all inspectors to have a minimum financial responsibility of $100,000 in the form of E&O insurance. You can also satisfy that requirement by getting a bond or other security accepted by the commission.
I guess my point is, step number one in this whole review process would be to go back and actually have the legislature clarify in the statute whether that's general or professional liability. Because I hear conflicting reports as to what the intent actually was, as far as what that insurance was supposed to be. I hear a lot of people say it was supposed to be general, so that if you break something in there, you flood somebody's house or something like that, that you have a way to compensate that property owner for that information to be there. I mean, we don't even require brokers to have E&O insurance unless they own like less than 10% of the actual entity. But all inspectors have to. So first, I'd like to see the legislature actually clarify in the statute whether that's actually professional or general liability, whichever way they go, but I'd like to see that clarification instead of it just being an interpretation from the Real Estate Commission. And if that's the case, and if we're going to stick with the E&O, then we have to look at the recovery fund and determine if it's even still needed. If the legislature determines that it is absolutely imperative we have to have E&O insurance, then what's the point of having a recovery fund? We either need to get rid of E&O and keep the recovery fund, or keep E&O and get rid of the recovery fund. Having both is kind of silly. Now, granted, we took away, as far as what inspectors pay into that, it's substantially less than what it was before. But still, it's just sitting there. Either we use it or it needs to go away.
A dividend to inspectors.
Hey, inspectors paid in for it, but
Well, I think inspectors already got some money paid out of it as they lowered the fund.
They lowered it for the new inspectors coming in
Right,
to $10.
right.
yeah.
I tend to agree with Lee. We need to go back and start
Oh,
the
did that
AG.
happen? Did that happen?
Oh. Mark that as one.
Make sure you can copy this.
5 years.
The Attorney General did not render an opinion either way. They kind of threw the ball.
They punted it, is what it looks like to me.
So I'm of the opinion, let's go back to the legislator that drafted it.
Still around?
And that's, well, I don't know what it is or not, but he or she, I don't have any idea.
Well, and not to disrespect your recommendation, but the courts have said that the opinion of one legislator, even the one who might have drafted the legislation, does not represent the collective intent of the legislature that actually passes and adopts the statute. So it would be better to recommend language that you would want the legislature to adopt. So you might want to amend subsection A1 or recommend that the legislature amend A1 to say a professional liability insurance or a general liability insurance policy.
That's, on the way down here, I was thinking kind of the same line. Want to give it back to them to make them choose, or propose clarifying our rule and just let them decide that?
Well, and if you remember, the recommendation that was sent to the commission that they adopted unanimously was that you guys come up with some recommendations.
Right.
Well,
So-
I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking, rather than, because I remember how long it took last time for them to make a non-decision and kick it back. And it might be easier for us to just propose, which is what the commission told us to do, what we want, and see if they approve it.
Right.
Yeah, so we're here to have an opportunity that we didn't have the first time, which is to help clarify this statute and then make that recommendation back
Yes.
to the commission. And
We were kind of hoping the AG would do that, and they said
Well-
it's up to you guys.
And typically that is the response that the
Yeah.
AG is going to give, because that's just the normal order of things. When the legislature charges an agency to enforce a statute, like Chapter 1102 of the Occupations Code, it is then within that agency's discretion as to how to interpret the legislature's directives. I mean, that's nothing different than a statute that the legislature adopts for any occupation, whether it's the appraisers that are regulated by this agency under Chapter 1103, or real estate brokers and sales agents that are regulated under 1101. It's within the agency's discretion to interpret what is meant by that statutory language. So it's not surprising that that's what the Attorney General said.
so,
Are you thinking that maybe a recommendation would be for us to draft what language that would be appropriate, what we would like to see in there, and then that goes forward, and that's just yes or no?
Well, that's a fairly simplistic approach, but yeah, I don't disagree with that approach.
eventually, yes. But the language is the part that we want to make sure we get correct, because if we ask the Attorney General for an interpretation of E&O versus general liability as inspectors and as our task is to protect consumers, which of those two types of policies answers
So we have
answers that
We have a couple of
challenge
choices.
the best.
Do we draft language that defines that it's E&O and it's within limits, or it's general liability? And that, I mean, this is our opportunity to draft of a
Right.
few choices that we think is appropriate and send it forward.
I mean, based on what we've talked about over the years since all this started, and most recently with it coming back up, I kind of see we can go with E&O at 100,000 with acceptable defense within limits policy, or general and keep the recovery fund. And is that kind of the gist of what I would see are two main?
I agree with that approach. The one thing we probably would need to do, if we do retain the recovery fund, is up the limits.
Okay.
Because it really is
I would agree with that.
kind of a joke at this point.
I would agree with that.
12.5.
Yes, 12.5
Yeah, so
for
if
the
we,
inspectors.
on the realtor, it's 50,000, is
Yep.
it not? If we raise ours
To the same.
to go to 50,000,
Well, how much is in the fund too?
There was 400 and some thousand.
No, there's 600
There's
plus.
600 some thousand.
Yeah, I mean, you would need to probably look at that whole structure if you're going to raise the limits. I mean, I think you probably, I mean, I don't know, you probably have to look at raising the limits of what we keep, as well as,
The surplus has been going over to general fund.
it is, and you would also likely, in order to fund it, probably have to raise the fees.
Back up.
Maybe not back up to 100, I don't know, but I don't think $10 would cover it to get it up to that point.
You'd have to raise the fees, and there would be a story with that, but you'd have to have a very, if that was the direction we went, we'd have to make it very clear that your E&O, what you're paying in E&O would substantially drop, as well. Because as soon as people see fees go up, they're going to go nuts,
But it's only in the initial application, that's a one-time payment.
Which most of us.
Unless the fund falls short, and then the commission had the authority, if memory serves me right, to come back and reassess all inspectors.
Right, that's how that
You
works.
typically, if the main fund went up, say to 600,000 or 700,000, is there a timeline that you would have to be at that 700,000 that would require us to
I don't know how that works.
I mean, would that be in the language that would be adopted?
It would probably be in the enacting clause of whatever legislation in terms of the timeframes on that. When that was implemented, that was before any of us sitting at this table were even sitting or doing this. So,
Can I ask Commissioner Arriaga, do you know of any time that they've reassessed the brokers and realtors on recovery fund?
I don't remember it.
I don't think we
I've
have.
never heard of that at any commission meetings I went to over the last 14 years.
There's a lot more of them though to hit that.
Oh, I
cap
understand,
amount.
but
Right.
I don't know what the balance is in their recovery fund either.
And we're all perfect.
I will tell you that we have not had to pay over money from the real estate recovery fund to GR. We have and will have to pay over money from the inspector's recovery fund to GR because we are at
claims.
that cap, and there are no claims coming in from the public to the inspector recovery fund. And you may want to consider, well, why are there no claims coming in to the inspector recovery
Well, I think there's
fund?
no claims right now because there's E&O and people are defaulting to that. But prior to this coming into play, when was the last claim against the inspector recovery fund?
There's one there.
It's been a long time. I remember
there was one
one or
last year?
two, but it's been a long time.
There's
One or two
one,
last year.
yes, there have been two within the past 2 years. But you regularly see at least 10 claims
side.
on the real estate
I
side.
see those.
I mean, you mentioned raising the limits. When you think about it, it's not worthwhile for a member of the public to hire an attorney, pay the cost to go to court, and obtain a judgment against an inspector to get a payout of only $12,500. I mean, at a minimum, you're typically looking at $5,000 just to get through the court system. And that assumes that the inspector doesn't fight the claim and that the court is able to enter what's called a default judgment because the inspector doesn't appear to defend that claim. But just in round figures, that is eating up about half of what the member of the public could recover. And, maybe the damages that they have are well in excess of that cost just to get the recovery.
And that discussion is only if we take that path there. I like the first path, maybe addressing the E&O specifically. Who would be charged with drafting the wording for that within the committee? Is there any standard?
Well, I mean, I think what probably how it would work is if you guys come up with a recommendation, then staff could come up with some language to bring back to you for review and approval.
Because there isn't really a committee set up for administrative actions.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be just like when we draft rules. I mean, you tell the
Give them
staff, this is our
suggestions and they work
goal,
with that.
and then we bring you back.
Yeah, we bring you back
some
suggested
proposed
language, maybe a couple of options or something.
I think it's
Go.
worth maybe designating a couple of members just to work with staff on that and then like a special committee just to do that and bring it back to the committee?
But I mean, I think our goal here is to kind of decide which of those two paths
Well, if
we really look at. I mean, I look at the two paths that I mentioned. From a personal standpoint and a financial standpoint, I like not having the E&O and having the recovery fund. That means more money in my pocket. Completely understand that. But sitting at this table, that's not my job. My job is to look out for the consumer. And our job is to look out for the consumer is what's going to be in the best interest long-term of all consumers as it relates to the inspection industry. And as much as it costs us more, I think keeping the E&O, but specifying E&O, but allowing the defense within limits, would eliminate the questions that we have. It would eliminate the problem that what started all this conversation, 6 or 12 months ago, about having that clause in there. But I think a lot of inspectors are still going to go over that 100,000, perfectly, fine. But I think if we just clarify those 2 points, that it's professional liability and that the defense within limits clause is allowed with that $100,000 minimum, and get rid of the recovery fund, I think that kind of seals it up.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, since we have several people with public comments, to see if that kind of can add to this discussion before we move on. So on this item, I have Mike Cothran on item 7.
Mike Cothran here on behalf, speak up.
Yes, sir, please.
On behalf of TREIC. I don't have a prepared statement. I'll leave that for Paul because we've submitted one to the committee, but I do want you to keep a couple of things in mind here. First, respectfully, a couple of things. Tony, can you put the motion that is indicated as coming from the commissioners back up, please?
The motion?
From us to the commission.
That one is not the one that I took home with me, hard copy that they passed. The one that I took home was more detailed than that. It spelled out, limits of liability and something on the recovery fund. It was pretty specific, so I would ask that.
This
that
was
would be
taken straight from a fly sheet that was given to the commission. This wouldn't have been anything different than what they.
Off on the materials that was read out, Tony. But I mean,
okay.
I call that to your attention. Excuse me. Also, respectfully, I have read several times over the years since 2007 the AG's opinion, and I did not pull out exactly what was Kristen had mentioned here, but I did pull out some other things, and that's the AG, who's now our governor, by the way, said he couldn't tell what kind of insurance this was, and it was the reason why was because the lawmakers were simply not clear on whether they intended it to be professional or whether they intended to be general liability. So I would ask for you to recall that. He said the law was badly written, frankly, as did Governor Perry when he signed it, and called it onerous. He said it needed to be revisited. Of course, it has not. And so I would take some exception as to whether TREIC actually has the right or ability to go ahead and prescribe what the lawmakers said when the Attorney General of Texas said, I can't really tell what their intent was. So I think revisiting it is probably a good idea with the legislature. I also want you to leave open the option that one of the options to be put before them is maybe we don't need it. That's certainly an option that needs to be kept open. I would remind you that E&O is, by its nature, a business insurance that business owners use to protect themselves. I had it before 2007, and I will have it afterwards. It's a reasonable and important part of a business decision to have E&O, and I'm sure every broker in the state of Texas probably has E&O, and it probably covers his agents too. That would be smart business entity to me. So, in terms of mandating it, always had a big question in my mind as whether it ought to be mandated any more than any kind of other kind of insurance, most notably the Affordable Health Care Act. But that's a whole other topic, so I'll leave that. In terms of the recovery fund removal, whether it's needed or not, I don't know. I'd have to think on increasing the limits. I think that was discussed several years ago, and it was certainly an option, but I guess it didn't go anywhere. But in terms of its use, I would remind you that in the January Commissioners meeting, it has been used against, Commissioner Arriaga will remember, it was used against one of the agent license, the salesman licensees. And it's almost like a double jeopardy because he had a court award in a civil litigation that had awarded the plaintiff full recompense, and the complainant was now going after some extra gratis from the recovery fund, which I don't know if I consider that reasonable. I mean, I believe in people being made whole, but not necessarily doubly whole. And then, let's see, I certainly believe this is warranted to incur further review. Probably in a venue smaller than this, it's hard for this many people to make a decision, but I certainly it would warrant further review. That's what I.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, Scott? Yeah, you're good? Michael Hamill?
I'm good.
Good? Okay. And then Paul Roebuck.
Thank you, Deb. My name is Paul Roebuck, and I appreciate you guys giving us the opportunity to speak on this. I personally feel, and have talked with inspectors across the state, hundreds and hundreds of them, and that the insurance requirement is one of the biggest issues that inspectors face and do not like. We feel like that has been pushed down our throats without means. If you go back and look at how this thing first evolved, how it even came into existence, it was late at night and just thrown in, and then it was signed and pushed through real quick without consideration of anybody. As far as the inspector goes, I understand this committee represents consumers, not the inspectors. But as an association, we represent our members. And our members feel like the E&O is something that has put a target on our back. We don't have a lot of claims on the recovery fund. That's because we've got a large policy of E&O put on us. And to raise that amount or to take out the defense limits on this, that would be totally crazy. I mean, we're going to be losing inspectors left and right. We don't need to lose them. If you look around the room at most of us guys, you know, we're gray hair, white hair, whatever. You know, I don't know how many years most of us will be in the business. But to look around, I mean, why don't we see younger ones coming in? Because they see the restrictions that TREIC has placed on us and the interpretation of some of this stuff. Guys, that's just unfair. You talk about a hardship to work, a burden that's undue placed on the inspectors. We have it. This committee's time to correct the mistake that was made. Let's take the recovery fund, and we can increase the limits on that. We're fine with that. I mean, 12,000 is nothing. We all know that. But let's take that recovery fund, let's toss it out. The other thing is, realtors don't have that same recovery fund. I mean, we're licensed under the same agency. Why don't we have a level playing field, all we're asking for? And that's all I got, guys.
I'm confused. You're saying that realtors do have a recovery fund?
They're not required to have it like inspectors.
No.
E&O insurance, not recovery.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay,
Thank
okay. I'm just trying to
No, I'm talking about
make sure
E&O.
I'm in-
No.
Realtors are not required to have it unless they own less than 10% of the business entity that's there. But as far as your comment about new inspectors, I would beg to differ on that. At our meeting we had towards the end of the year, Gwen nicely provides us numbers of new licensees, and we had made note that over 40% of active licensees had been licensed within the last 2 years.
Okay. But
So
if you
we're
go
getting
back
a lot.
when the E&O first came into existence, compare those numbers and.
But that wasn't your statement, sir. Your statement was
I
getting new
understand.
inspectors into the business now, and that's, by numbers, simply isn't the case. There are a lot of new inspectors coming into the business right now.
I think you said young.
He's trying to how many are leaving? Well, that's been happening for as long as, if I can remember, long before the 2007 stuff came in. But,
I think Paul said young, I think he used the word young, not young.
okay. Well, and also on the recovery fund isn't a double dip by any means. The only way to get money from the recovery fund is to have a judgment against somebody first, and then the recovery fund goes to satisfy that judgment. If
it's not
that's my
satisfied by
understanding.
insurance.
That's correct.
You're not double dipping in anything.
But then they can probably get
I'll have to retort on that, but.
Yeah.
Leisure.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Can I make one statement just to clarify the record?
Absolutely.
So in 2013, the legislative session of 2013, this issue was, the statute was opened up and this issue was addressed again for clarification. And the agency at that time reached out to inspectors and had conversations with several associations to do that and trying to get clarification on this. So, and at that time, the governor signed that bill without any hesitation in terms of the clarification. Now, it might not have been the clarification we're all desiring now, but it was looked at that point. So I understand the heartburn about the 2007 edition, but it has been looked at and addressed since then, and the agency did seek input from the industry at that point as well.
Right.
So,
2013?
2013. Yes, sir.
And I did verify the motion that is on the screen is the exact same motion that was in the commission materials.
Right.
We met with you guys.
Okay, so as a committee, on this issue right now for today, well, we didn't talk about the contractual limitations of liability. Do we want to move on from A and B and move to C?
Well, just one other thing to discuss on A and B. We had at a previous meeting the numbers from an insurance company as far as actual claims, what were actually paid out.
One company.
Granted, just
And
one
we
company.
didn't, and
It
we
was one
didn't have any,
representation.
and we didn't have anything to support that.
But it was just one company. Absolutely. And I'm not using that as a basis to raise limits or anything like that by any means, because I don't think that was justified, certainly not by that information. But, like I said, personally, I don't like the E&O. It drives me nuts. I don't like having to pay for it, but
So just a question to you, Lee. If you weren't required by TREIC to have E&O insurance, would you have it?
I probably still would.
You still would?
I probably still would, just because
Because it's a
like I said,
business
it's a good
decision
business
and not
decision to do it. I have it as a brokerage. You know, my brokerage has it and my inspection company has it.
So the issue is being required to have it? Is the issue?
I just don't know if it's in line with the rest of the agencies. TDA doesn't require E&O.
What
We've looked-
agencies are required to have?
We've looked at other states and their requirements for inspectors, in particular the states surrounding Texas, like Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. And the insurance agents that we talk to, I mean, most of them do, and their policy limits are like $250,000, $500,000, or $300,000, $600,000. And the insurance agents, when we asked, well, what's the cost of those policies? And would it be more expensive, less expensive? I mean, we have this 100/100 policy. And to a person, all of the insurance agents that we spoke with said it would be more effective and less costly to change the limits in the statute to reflect that model of 250, 500, 200, 400. The cost, inspectors would not see a drastic increase, if any increase at all, because those statutory limits are so unusual, it causes insurance companies to have to write a special policy for inspectors in Texas.
So what you're saying is the 100/100 is unusual?
Yes.
Are those other states requiring home inspectors to have those E&O?
Yes, there are. And we can bring back that data. I don't have it at my fingertips, but we're happy to bring back the data and expand that search across the state, because as you know, not all states regulate insurance or home inspectors.
Right.
See, and I got different information from 3 different insurance companies about how much that would get raised if I was to bump from, if inspectors would go from 100,000 to 250 or the 100. But there was a pretty good increase in that price.
Well, it's going to depend on how you model the policy. I mean, if it's 250, sure, because again, you're talking about an unusual policy structure.
Well, I think you're also got to look at perception. From a consumer's perception, you see, they bumped the limit from 100 to 250 or 500, whatever the case may be.
Sure.
To me, I think there is already a target on our back. I think that just makes that target even bigger. you put a higher dollar amount on that.
Well, maybe you just go to 100, 300 so that your policy structure is a model policy structure, and then that way you wouldn't pay anymore. So you're not really raising the limits per claim, you're just looking in terms of the aggregate, and that it protects both consumers and it protects inspectors as well. Because if you have one claim that exceeds that limit,
You're on the hook.
well, then you're
Right
on the
for
hook for anything above that in the aggregate.
And I just want to, again, talking about kind of the history of this, that 100,000 was added statutorily in 2013 as a result of the conversations we had with the inspector industry, because that limit was not articulated in the statute prior to that date. And that was a concession to the inspector, the concerns of the inspector industry at that time. Even though we knew that was not your standard insurance policy type. Usually you have a higher aggregate than you do your per claim limit, and that was going to cause a little bit of issues with the insurance industry at the time.
So the 100 is per claim and the 300 is the aggregate.
That's what that
per
would
year.
be if you
Is
did it that
that's-
way.
Okay,
That's
just
more
for
of
me
an
to
off the
clarify.
shelf.
Okay.
It's kind of like your car insurance, usually like 25, 50 or 50 or 100.
So
Right.
your belief is buying a whatever limit it is, but having the aggregate higher than the single occurrences and off the shelf, it might be easier to find and price versus
Correct.
custom.
We could get some information about that too. Bring it
So as a
back.
committee, the first thing we need to decide is what type of policy we're going to write into this.
Right.
What type of recommendation?
I
Yes,
mean,
and
we might not, if we don't even recommend E&O, then we don't need to address the limits.
sure. But I mean, in order for the committee to consider all of the options, I mean, that's the type of data that you could request staff to go out and gather
Yeah,
for you.
we're happy to do that.
I mean, the data I want to see is I just want to see what other, I mean, I personally would have E&O, but I want to see what's required on industry levels all through the state.
So
'Cause I know like the pest control operators are not required to have that. We're talking about brokers not being required to have that. So that's my first question, is to see what is commonly required. And
For different agencies
Right.
within the state.
Right.
For different occupations. And there are several that do require the occupation to have financial responsibility.
I mean, TDA requires you to have a G&L policy, but not an E&O.
So in the end, what's the real goal? Is to protect the consumer from if an inspector misses something or if an inspector screws something up? No, they're two different things.
Right.
Screw something up, meaning.
Like you leave
Missing
the oven
something
on,
is
it
errors
catches
and-
fire, or you leave a toilet.
Okay, well, that's liability, that's general liability.
That's general, that's what I'm getting at.
But there have been cases of both, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Errors meaning that you missed something
I'm
with the
not denying that there are cases of both, but
Right.
my question is,
Which one
what's
costs
the
the
real
most?
goal here?
Yeah, that's
what we're
kind of
trying
where
to
my
do.
question comes from is it common to protect the consumer through E&O, or is it just common to protect the consumer through G&L and then leave the rest to the private decision? Yeah.
Does the recovery fund, and this is a question I don't know, and I'm only asking it to clarify this, does the recovery fund specify the type of damages? In other words, could it be something that the inspector missed as well as physical damage to the property?
The recovery fund pays actual damages.
Okay,
So it's whatever is awarded in the judgment.
okay, so it just depends on what the judgment
So
says.
the judgment could award damages based on negligence, which
Okay.
would be damages because the inspector missed something.
Okay.
So an E&O type damage. The recovery fund could also award
Physical.
general liability damages. You know, the inspector left the faucet running or left the gas on.
Okay,
So that's not a difference. Now, one thing that you might consider, I mean, if you're required to get E&O, what we were told when we were interviewing different insurance companies, they said that adding a GL policy as a rider on your E&O policy was like $50. I mean, it's very inexpensive to do that for what you're currently required to have.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, you were saying with the general liability, though, that typically you would not see anyone going after that because the
court costs that would be involved with an attorney and such.
No, what I
That
was
was
saying
on
is the
recovery
recovery
fund.
fund
Recovery
in
fund, okay.
general. Because in order just to get into court, just to hire an attorney, I mean, you can do this all on your own. You do not have to hire an attorney to prosecute a recovery fund claim. There's no requirement that you have an attorney. But many people are unsophisticated enough that they don't have the wherewithal to process that claim all through the court system and satisfy the requirements to then be eligible for a payment from the recovery fund. So we don't see a huge number of claims, either on the inspector side or on the real estate side. If you have to hire an attorney, then at a minimum, that attorney is going to look for something that is $5,000 in terms of their time and effort just to take the case, file all the motions, and get it through the court system.
My next question is, if the inspectors solely relied on the recovery fund as and didn't have insurance, their business decision, the recovery fund, let's say we put a limit of 30,000, I'm just throwing a number out, and their claim is more than 30,000, then that judgment's not met just by the recovery fund. So then what happens? Does the judgment come to that person personally, their house, their assets,
As long as it's not a homestead, it goes into non-homestead assets. Now they can, whatever funds they get out of the recovery fund gets taken off of the judgment itself, and that has to be filed. So if it was a $50,000 judgment, they get 30 from the TREIC. That 30 gets reduced to 20. Now you have an active $20,000
that you still
judgment,
have
if
to,
I'm not
you
mistaken.
still as a private individual
owe that
have to
$20,000.
satisfy them, plus
Well,
you
and-
have to pay back the recovery fund.
Correct.
which
Before you can
license
work.
Then be on.
Revoked.
So now
Yes.
you have no income
Right.
because your license is
Correct.
revoked.
That's correct.
And you also owe $20,000 to a consumer from your own pocket, plus another 50 or 30,000 back to.
That's correct.
So this makes only having the recovery fund a really risky.
From the inspector point of view, because I think a lot of times people forget that if you have a judgment on the recovery fund, you have to pay it back before you can work again.
Right, exactly. So if you don't have 30,000 or
right.
50,000 or whatever to begin with,
Right.
then you're not going to even be working as a home inspector.
Correct.
You're done.
Correct.
To get that money to
To get
pay.
that, yes, ma'am.
So it would not be a very good business decision to not have some sort of insurance and rely solely on the recovery
The
fund.
recovery fund is a liability for the inspector in the sense that if it is utilized, we can't work until we get that paid back.
Correct.
That may go into our decision of which way to go.
Well, I think I think the reason I brought it up, and the reason I think the chair brought it up, is a lot of people forget about that aspect of it, that you have to pay it back. You cannot work as an inspector if there's an outstanding claim on, or payment back to TREIC from the recovery fund, from that inspector.
How can a second mortgage just so you can work?
I'm sorry, Eddie.
Is there an umbrella policy?
Say your name.
Say your name. Eddie. Is there an umbrella policy for E&O insurance? Or do you
I'm
have
sorry, a what?
Umbrella policy.
Umbrella policy for E&O?
You can purchase umbrella policies
For
for
you know.
your insurances. Okay, so Brenda Roebuck, you wanted to speak on this?
Yes, my name is Brenda Roebuck, and I'm with TREIC. And listening to all the conversation, there's so much that is correct and information of how inspectors look at it, and there's some that's not. And it may be because we don't understand the full intent. But I was around in 2013, and I know that I was on the phone to the governor's office every few days. I think it's important that, one, you all make the decision on whether it's a recovery fund or whether it's E&O insurance. It was the mandate of the E&O insurance on your license that was the problem. Most business owners that are very serious about, you don't stay in business because you do a bad job. You're gonna be out of business real fast. It is a business decision that every good business owner should have E&O insurance. We had it. We have general liability. We have much more than what is required. But in the case of, and maybe to Tony's point, inspectors don't realize that they have to pay it back. But I get to talk to a lot of inspectors, and I know I can give you one instance. There was an inspector out of the Houston area that had a suit. It wasn't brought by the buyer. The buyer just signed on to it whenever they wanted to sue this inspector. The specialist came in. They had inspections done. There was no fault found against this inspector. But sitting at a table with the attorneys and with the mediation people, it was stated that he was the low-hanging fruit on the tree and the only one with insurance. So how many times, as representative of the voice of inspectors, that our inspectors spend money out of their own pocket, and they have to pay not only for the damage if there is damage, but they also have to defend themselves for a frivolous lawsuit. Something that has come in and now they've spent lots of money because there's a lawsuit that's been filed. You have the E&O that would cover that, but you have the deductibles. And if you want to make it a reasonable policy amount, you have a higher deductible. So I think that as we look at it, and as a committee that inspectors represent the consumers, again, we're not in business just to go have fun at a house. We're in business to represent someone as they're buying probably the largest purchase they'll ever make. So we want to do a good job, and we want to make sure that if there are rules, that the rules are there so that others can't take advantage of it. And right now, it is felt within the inspection industry that there is a disadvantage of being an inspector. And to Paul's point, and the gray hair, hey, wash it out, you know, that's what you do. But you have a lot of your seasoned inspectors that they know, they've been out there, they've done the work. Your younger inspectors coming in, it is to make, and not against anyone that's young in here, but they don't understand the hardships and the battles that have been fought ahead of them. And so as this committee meets, we need to know what the direction is that you want to go and what the purpose of going that direction is. And feedback from the associations and from the inspectors. I think the survey is a good way of reaching out in many areas, because inspectors, and maybe if they get to answer a survey without having to come and stand before you, because that's intimidating in itself, but that you'll get the ideas of what they're looking for. We want to protect the consumer, but we also don't want to see the inspectors mortgage their homes. You can do that on having E&O insurance. If your deductibles are so high, the defense outside of limits, I have found no one that says that they could write those policies. I have heard, and as you all know, if you just common sense, if an attorney charges, if an attorney goes after you and you spend $80,000 to defend your name, your company, the job that you did, you're going to be going to mortgage your home. You're going to have to go borrow money. So the premiums, just as in everything else, if there's a case that is one, or someone wins against you, your premiums just went up higher than you could ever afford. So it is, as this committee, and I ask you, as head of, right now, the president of TREIC, I want to be able to go back to our members and say, I know that this committee is looking at all aspects of these issues that affect you, and that they're going to stand and give you an option of which one you feel is the best for inspectors, but that's going to represent the consumers that you work with. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so what we need to do is decide what direction we want to go, so that we can give staff some direction as far as what kind of data do we need.
And if I can just bring one more historical thing up, because I think it's just important to let everyone who's here presently understand this. The initial draft of the 2013 legislation had a provision or process to remove the recovery fund. So it was to try to clarify it was E&O and remove the recovery fund, because that was a thought, you don't need both. And at that time, the inspector industry weighed in and said, no, we would like you to keep it. And that was one of the directives from the governor's office, is that you keep the recovery fund at that time if you're going to. So that's why that was put back into place at the time. That's not to say it's still, it's not something that can't be discussed now, especially if you clarify things. But I just wanted to let you know that at that moment, or at that time, that was part of that discussion, was you have E&O, why do you need the recovery fund? So there was a process to make it go away after a few years, and then it was put back in place because of some concern. So there was discussion among, I think you were actually part of that discussion as well at that time.
I'm going to bring up the field that I'm in, architecture. We do have like typically $1 million policies on errors and omissions. The main problem is you can say it's going to be a target on your back, but regardless, if you're working the job, you have a target on your back if something happens. So the question is, do you pay a small fee or not such a small fee, but still end up keeping your house, or not pay it and have someone coming after you and then not having your house? We're here to protect the consumer, but at the same time, you don't want to see inspectors go out of business. The reality is, purchasing this insurance is really a safety factor for yourself too. And I mean, we've gotten sued before. I know architects have gotten sued, and it's hard to come out of it if you don't have the insurance. So I feel where everyone's coming from, but I also think that if we're looking at it as a consumer side, I probably wouldn't hire an inspector if I knew they didn't have some sort of insurance. Same way you wouldn't hire an architect. We have contractors that have general liability for a certain amount. We're still liable for things that the contractor does. So if we don't have insurance, we're in trouble no matter what.
Does our state agency require y'all to have E&O?
I think so. But I don't know. I'd have to dig into that. It's not something that...
Yeah.
But
I mean, most people are.
I don't think you're required to do it.
And you bring up a good point. In the nature of what we do have a target on our back.
Yeah.
It's a very volatile time for a buyer. They're going through, there's a lot of emotion that's in there. And, when something goes wrong a month or two after they move in and they find something, and people try to sue us for all sorts of stuff. They had this huge rug in the living room and didn't realize there was water damage in the middle of the floor of it. Now all of a sudden the house is empty and it's the inspector's fault. And I don't know if that drastically changes because we have E&O. I think that they're just going to immediately come after us because that's the nature of what they're going to do. I don't know if E&O actually. I don't think most consumers realize we have E&O.
I don't know, would you hire a builder, plumber, electrician that wasn't either bonded, licensed, and insured? I don't know. Electrician, there's licensing, right?
Yeah.
Plumbers,
Plumbers,
there's
electricians, and
licensing, HVAC is
And sprinklers.
licensed, and they're probably bonded and insured. And you wouldn't want to hire some guy that comes into your house that doesn't have those items. If your house burns down and your electrician was just there and he didn't have any insurance, that would be a bad day for you. I mean, you luckily might have insurance, but then your insurance company goes out to those people. It's just the way the industry works. So I guess,
Was Stephen's suggestion earlier for put together a
I think
subcommittee
that's what I was
and
going
try
to go with that.
to get this resolved?
So I would like to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Speak for a second. Hi, my name is Scott Regan. I'm with Terry and an individual. I actually hold a pest license, an AC license, a builder's license, an inspector's license. I pay less on each one of those policies than I do for a TREIC because a 100 and 100,000 does not equal out in anybody's category. I actually pay 3 times the amount for my inspector's insurance than I do for either one of the other ones. Pest license is 300 and 100,000. My air conditioning is 500,000 and 300,000. And that's the only thing I think everybody needs to understand. The policy that you have set for at the beginning is not a reachable policy in any insurance company. if you make a policy that's compatible to the rest of TDLR requirements, your insurance will drop, and it's still available for the consumer's corrections. That's all I'll say.
The 100 is the minimum. I mean, people can choose to do the 100-300 aggregate to fall more in line with any policy and do that. So if that was the case,
That's what the policy. You're right about that, but most people are going to go with what the statutory requirement is. They're not going to necessarily go over it. I mean, that's the baseline. You're right.
but
They
if it
can.
was less,
They
to
can.
go 100-300 than it is to go 100-100.
Well, that's information we can definitely bring back. I mean, from my prior life, I was involved in insurance stuff, and I know anytime there's a product that's outside of the norm, if it's specific, because what you're doing is you're writing it just specifically for a state, that increases the issue. I mean, in terms of the premium. But that's, I mean, definitely we don't want you guys to necessarily make a decision out in a vacuum. We can do the research and bring that back to you guys.
If we do get numbers on insurance companies, if we can adjust to ensure that the numbers that we get from insurance companies are based on sole proprietors and not just companies that have multiple inspectors, because I think that drastically skews the numbers of what we get.
Okay.
Because I think the vast majority of inspectors are sole proprietors, and that would represent a larger number of people that this would affect.
Yeah, John Cahill.
Mr. Cahill?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. If you could speak loudly, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very interesting conversation. I think that my suggestion is that you need to define public protection, and then that sets the path for everything else. And what I'm understanding right now is that public protection means paying for any and every miss of the standards of practice without the ability to limit liability. That's, I think, what's on the table right now. And if you define what public protection is, it sets the path for everything else down the road. That's the only comment I had.
Thank you, John. Anybody have anything for that?
So you're going to chair the committee?
Okay, so I think what we want to do, I'm going to go ahead and create a subcommittee, which is what I think you guys want to do, right? Lee?
Yeah, I think it's
Okay. And who wants to be on the subcommittee, and how many members do we want to have? The
Well,
most
you
we can
can't.
have
You
is
can't
three.
have the most you can have is 4, which would not be a quorum of the
Does it
committee.
need to be committee members, or can it be public members as
Well,
well?
it could be a working group if you want to do that, but
That's what I'd recommend.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll volunteer for that.
Matt, we only have Barbara and Matt, so.
currently, yes.
Barbara, are you interested in being on the subcommittee for this?
I think you need a public member just for down the road. I have some constraints right now, but go ahead and understand I would like to do it, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Well, that's what happens when you don't attend the meetings. You get volunteered.
I got that.
Okay, so we're gonna put Barbara Evans as our public member and Brad Phillips. Okay, we can only have 4. Are you interested in being, do you want to be on it, Steve? Yes.
Is it a working group?
What is a working group?
Well, a subcommittee would be kind of a, I don't know.
But a
sort of-
working group is, what's the definition for my definition?
I just think a subcommittee is made up of members of the committee. A working group, to me, it's just a distinction, would include those as well as other members of
Other stakeholders.
Yeah, other
so
stakeholders.
Others,
Associations.
like other people in the room.
Right.
Oh, okay, so that can be, what's the?
Well, you don't want it to be
People.
you don't want it to be too big. I'd defer to.
I mean, I would say, somewhere between 5 and 7 if you wanted to create a working group.
Okay. Let's make it that. Scott, is there anybody from Terry that wants to be on this?
Mike.
Mike?
God,
Mike will be on there. Okay. Mike?
So just to keep the associations in it, because I think that they're here and they're wanting to talk about it. So from Terry, we're going to have Mike Hammond. Hamill, I'm sorry.
Is there anybody from Ashley here? Paul?
Who from Korea? Paul Roebuck. And then you said Ashley, but I don't know if anybody from
Ashley's here.
Well, I'm Ashley too.
Are you Ashley? Okay, so can you wear two hats or is that right?
Been wearing them for a long time.
I don't think it's appropriate for a committee member to wear
also
two hats
represent, yeah, I was
on a
gonna
working
say,
group.
I don't think that's.
Well, Paul's also a member of Ashley too, right?
Can I ask a favor as well? Because I think this is important for someone, for a public member to be on. So if there's a conflict with Dr. Evans, would it be okay if we ask
Matt to be backup?
Yeah, I just think it's important for this particular issue, since it is dealing with public protection, or protection of the public, that there's a public member, at least at some point, if there's a conflict, that can attend the meeting.
Tony, could we have two?
That would mean you'd have to knock an inspector member off, because then it'd be a quorum.
Okay.
I mean, it's up to the committee. I just don't.
Well, she's already having possible schedule constraints.
Okay,
So a working group
I don't
has
have anybody
issues.
from
How many you
the
got?
Well, yeah, if there's more than 4 members, it'd be a quorum of the, because you're talking about business, it'd be a quorum of the committee.
Can I be on it or not?
No, I
No,
mean,
okay.
you could, but you'd have to knock one of the other committee members
No,
off.
so we have Sean from here, we have Brad, Lee.
I mean, here,
That's 5.
So now,
We
well, you're
already
saying,
have 5.
she said I could go up to 7.
No,
No, total.
4 committee.
here's the issues. If you have a quorum of the committee, it's got to be posted as a committee meeting. So, and it's subject to all of those
We need a public member who's
requirements.
also considered a committee member.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's Barbara, but if we put Matt on there as a backup, then that's 2.
Put him as an alternate for sure.
No, basically, if Barbara can't go.
It would be just if there's a
He's the-
conflict. I just think it's important that we have that viewpoint in the working group.
Okay, so we have all the committee members on there.
And we've got the 2
and the
associations.
2 associations.
Well, and if there's a desire to have multiple committee members to exceed a quorum,
We could
We
put.
just need to
I
post
mean,
it.
Yeah,
right.
it's
and-
just those
and
requirements.
It might be helpful to post it, because then you could have other stakeholders come and, give input.
So you could just make it a specific meeting agenda to deal with this issue
Right.
as a working group, and structure it so that's all you're speaking to, and it would focus the discussion. And you could have more than, and just post it as a public meeting, and have more members.
Except for me.
You could be on it.
Posting it, then you
We're
go.
posting it.
Well, I mean, if you're posting it, then all the committee members could be present
Yeah.
and come and speak to it. And, I mean, you would just be posted as a working
Yeah.
group meeting, and it would be subject to just
I think the
this.
important
The
thing
same
is just
thing
to
that
have
already
one
is.
topic and just get it resolved.
Right, right, I
Everybody
agree.
come prepared. Do that.
Okay, let's go with that.
Sorry.
Okay. And then, so the additional working group members we have are Mr. Hamill from Terry and Mr. Roebuck from TREIC.
Right.
And I guess the only, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Kristen, if you're structuring it as a working group, the only other sort of thing is that they would also be able to have input on what the decision is, those 2 members of the working group, right? To bring a recommendation to the full committee.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Correct. Right.
Everybody good with that? All right, so, do we need a motion for that, or is that just okay. All right, and so, trying to decide if we need to then talk about contractual limitations of liability, or do we want to put that in with the working group? You want, okay. Did you say yes?
Well, you might
Oh, I
ask,
thought I heard
if the committee wants to put that in as as part of the working group, you might ask the members of the public who are here if they wanted to speak.
Somebody need to explain specifically why that is there.
The contractual limitations of liability.
Yes.
It was brought up in the last meeting to discuss it.
Well, it's part of all of the consumer-related issues.
Right.
There are several inspectors who include language similar to what you see on the screen in their contracts that limit their liability purportedly to the amount of the cost of the inspection. And this is very common in inspector contracts. The issues that this brings up are, well, if an inspector can have this in their contract, then how does that square with the requirement in the statute to have financial responsibility? The legislature has required inspectors to have financial responsibility, whether you have an insurance policy, a bond, or some other form of security. But here you have inspectors by contractual agreement limiting that financial responsibility. So there's a conflict there. And the question is, would then be, well, how would a court or how would the commission view this? We've never been asked this question. The courts, Mr. Cahill did submit a comment and sent it to you via email. It's not in the inspector materials, but he cites to a case, Head versus U.S. Inspect, which was decided in February of 2005. And in that particular case, the court upheld the contractual limit of liability. I will tell you, however, that because that case was decided in 2005, which predates the date that the legislature added the financial responsibility requirement to the statute, that case is no longer valid law. The legislature superseded that case when it enacted the requirement to have financial responsibility. So that case would not be decided the same way if it were heard by a court today. So that's why this issue is wrapped into the larger issue of, consumer-related remedies.
And may also be a reason why there's not claims made. Why we don't see a whole lot of activity, because if a consumer says I need something, and the inspector says, well, you signed this contract and it limits your liability to this, they may or may not know that they can maybe seek further redress, and they just get the inspector fee and go on with their business. I'm just saying that could be a reason why. So I think regardless of what you guys decide on this, it is an important part of this discussion in terms of looking at the whole picture of what liability protection you're going to require and what is there to protect the consumer as well.
Was there thought bringing it up that putting it, well, I guess the question, you had said something about, was it in putting some comments in the preamble that address things like this?
Well, just as part of cleaning that up, if we're going to address this, that might not be a bad idea to put it in that preamble. If we're already going to look at redoing the preamble also. But if we decide something here, we might as well include it in here. So at least it's consistent across the board, is my thought, whatever we decide.
I can see the thought that it may be making it consistent, but it also kind of makes a conflict. If this is true, then why would you need insurance if the limit is just my inspection fee?
So that's why it's on here, because it is a part of that conversation,
But we all know that contract can be challenged in court anytime any attorney wants to do it. So
Right.
I really think we're overstepping this, quite honestly. I don't think that should even be up there.
Well, I can tell you in the other statutes that we looked at, when we were looking at other occupations that require financial responsibility, there's only one where the legislature has allowed the occupational license holders to limit their liability through contract, and it's commercial fire sprinkler system installers. So if the legislature had wanted to allow somebody with financial responsibility in the statute to limit their contractual liability, the legislature knows how to put that language into the statute. I mean, we can certainly, as a committee, make that recommendation if you want to include that type of language in your statutory recommendations that we would present to the commission and then forward to the Sunset Committee for review. So that's certainly a topic for conversation that you can have. But just as a matter of course, there's only one situation that we have found where the legislature has allowed a licensed occupation holder to limit their liability by contract when the legislature has also required them to have financial responsibility.
I think if we, through our work group, if we decide that we're going to keep the E&O and whatever the case may be, even if an inspector puts that in there, a good attorney is going to poke a hole right through it anyway. It's going to be completely irrelevant.
But I think part of the process going forward was not just to determine what the requirements are going to be going forward, but also to make it clear so at the end of the day, we're not having this same discussion a year down the road because no one knows what any of this stuff means.
The
You know?
conclusion of all of this is for us to be able to come up with a statute that meets our standards, our challenge of protecting consumers, and also clarifies the statute once and for all, and it's the opportunity to get that done now.
Right,
And also to have inspectors' input so that it's balanced, so that it's not always, the inspector losing. If there's frivolous lawsuits, or if it's got to be fair, and it's got to be affordable, and it's got to work for everybody.
If we lock down what we want the statute to be and get the statute in there, then
Right.
even if inspectors put that in there, it's going to be completely irrelevant.
I agree.
So I don't really see that as being too big of an issue, because I think if we clarify what we want the statute to be, given all the input from everybody else, then we can go back into that preamble and put specific language about what that new liability is going to be. And that's how you make it consistent across the board for a consumer, that even if they put in their little agreement afterwards that they're limited to that, the preamble in the form is going to supersede that.
Yes.
You want to take a minute?
Might be appropriate. We still got a few minutes.
Let's just go ahead. So I think that this agenda item, we've now decided that we're going to create a working group. So then going forward, we'll have to come up with a date, time, place for this working group to meet, and then have an agenda, which is going to be one item, basically the discussion of this topic. Is there anybody else that wanted to speak on this? I saw you raise your hand.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Bruce McCrary. Isn't there already a clause in the introductory part of the inspection report that alerts the consumer that there may be contractual comments added to that they should have their attorney look at? Isn't there a comment?
There is, we put that in the last provision of the
Yes.
OP one.
And it would seem that would be an alert which would override the concern about this.
I think he's talking about that language right before the break,
Right.
and where it says there may be contractual language. Please consult.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take just a 5-minute break.
I just had a question. Is there a timeline that we need to have all this by sunset?
Well, the Sunset staff is going to meet with us sometime at the end of April. It would be nice if we had some sort of obviously, anything that the committee recommends, the commission also needs to sign off on. So it'd be nice if we could have some sort of recommendation for the next commission meeting, I guess. Does that make sense, or is that too soon?
When is the next commission
That may be too soon. The next commission meeting is May 7th.
Okay.
But what I would suggest is that at a minimum, you encourage inspectors to go online and take the strategic planning survey, because this item is addressed on question 7. And even if that's the only question inspectors answer, then that information could be gathered in advance and brought to the working group's meeting.
Can we put a link to that in the next Inspector Insight, so if we make it as easy as possible for people to see where it's at, how to get to it?
Right.
It won't be a specific link to that question. It would just be a link
No, to the whole survey.
to take the survey.
And I don't want them to just look at the question, I want the whole survey, but I just want it to be as easy as possible for inspectors that see that to be able to go right there and get some survey.
The associations could send something out to your members.
And the survey is highlighted on the homepage, on TREIC's homepage.
Okay, so let's go ahead. We're good? We'll take a 5-minute break.
Time?
Time is 11:35. Okay, it's 11:43 and we're going to reconvene. So, Tony, I haven't been taking very good notes on the items that we want the TREIC staff to help us pull together for the meeting that we're going to talk about with the working group. Have you?
I have
Okay,
some,
you
and
have-
I will
okay.
also go back and watch the video for any clarification, just to make sure.
That'd be great. Is that good? Okay. So discussion item, agenda item number 8, discussion and possible action regarding content development for the Standards of Practice Review mandatory 4-hour inspector continuing education course.
Sorry, the go-to meeting just canceled. So I just want, you guys can keep talking, but I've got to redial that for some reason it did not, I'm not sure why that happened.
Is this something that you?
I think it's, Tony, is this just that we need to start
So this
talking
was,
about with our
so I just wanted to put it on the agenda in terms of getting everyone on board with the fact that in a year and a half, we have to have a course suggestion for those 4 hours, because you guys wanted, you recommended the course outline as I said, as a step, sorry.
To enable audio controls, please enter your...
As a step 2. Dr. Evans, are you there? Okay. As a step to get to a point where at least we had some, you guys had some say over what the content was, but the course outline and providers would meet that. But the next step was you wanted to have time to develop your own content at that time. So I just wanted to get the ball rolling on that, because sooner rather than later, because if you back up to that deadline of the course needing to be approved and there's no content, then we just go with the same thing we have. So
that's something really, I think, should be on the education subcommittee's, radar.
Front burner.
Yeah. But
Education.
But need to make sure the education subcommittee discusses with SOPs in case, as part of this review, certain changes get made, that those get incorporated into the new 4-hour course.
But the design of the SOP could be done. You're talking specifics that may change in the SOP committee.
Right, but before we just
But
did the
actual-
outline, the next 4 hours, we're actually doing the content.
Yeah.
So it might be beneficial. It's one of the reasons why the subcommittees are 3 members. If the SOP committee is working towards something and the education committee is working towards whatever they need to in terms of content, that the chair can show up and say, this is what we're working on, just to give you some input on that.
Well, that can also happen at the full committee meeting when the committees give their reports.
In the interim, though, the education committee works off the current standards of practice, and then we've got a year and a half.
Plug in modifications.
Just 12 modifications to the SOPs don't come easy.
Right.
So
if they do, as part of
If
this.
they do, but there'd be, I'm assuming any modifications we might make to the SOPs over the next year and a half are going to be somewhat minimal.
I would think so.
So the course is,
I'd hope so.
The course is, is required to be updated by September 1st of 2019. And we want to make sure we give providers enough time to implement any changes that are made on either 4-hour section.
So 6 months, 4 to 6 months.
So we're not
Probably
only looking
appropriate.
at putting together the.
We did 90 days the last time, didn't we?
Submitting changes.
Which is a little short.
To the legal update as well,
Don't want to be
yes.
too easy, too generous, John.
And then that'll be cyclical every 2 years. You'll look at all 8 hours.
Okay, so the education subcommittee needs to start working on this.
So they're both September 1st.
Yes, sir, of 2019.
Yeah, I think I'm in education.
You are, as a matter of fact.
I'll get with
Yes.
you on the dates and just work backwards with milestones. on
Okay,
both of these.
sounds good.
The
I'm
legal
gonna say-
update, you can't really do until next year anyway, until legislature comes up. So
We need to have stuff in place by February of 2019,
That's what I mean,
basically.
I'll work.
That'd give it time to get to
Look at
the
it.
May, whatever the May meeting is of the commission, and then
Right.
by
public
September 1.
comments and all that other stuff.
Look at a calendar and see what we do.
Okay,
Because we also will look back at things that have happened since the last one, which
Correct.
has been over a year.
correct. Yes, sir.
About a year.
Alrighty, so agenda item 9, discussion and possible action regarding amendments to 22 TAC 535.201 definitions.
Oh, do you want me to do this?
This
or-
one is the client.
Do you want me to?
Sure.
Okay, so at the last meeting, the committee asked staff to come up with a possible suggestion for definition of client. In looking at that, I also noticed that code organization and trade association, both defined specifically for subchapter R, are not used anywhere in subchapter R. So there's superfluous, or they don't need to be defined because the terms aren't defined. And trade association is defined in 535 elsewhere, and that applies to subchapter R and everything else. So this definition doesn't need to be incorporated. And then in terms of client, the thought process there was to tie it into, based on the discussion of what we had last time, to try to tighten up who that is and have it be a buyer or seller or a prospective buyer or seller of real property, because that's who is the, in terms of the transaction, that's who's involved in the transaction. So, oh, I'm sorry. I need to speak up. Does anyone have any questions about that? Does that make sense to everybody?
It's pretty
I think
clear.
that clarifies it, who the client is. I think.
Right.
Because it was like whoever's paying for it.
Right.
And we're not tying it to a financial.
So this,
opportunity.
someone else could pay for it, say the parent of whoever is a prospective buyer or seller could pay for the inspection, but the person who's got an interest in the property, if you will, is
Anybody else here?
is the client.
Think of another person that would be considered a client.
Not
in a real
that
estate
subject
transaction.
under our TREIC inspections. Pretty much covers.
I mean, if it's an existing homeowner and we're doing a regular, it doesn't even.
It's not part of the
There's
sale.
one
It doesn't
possibility
come
we
under
could
our TREIC.
have to deal with, and that's where we've got a company transfer, where the company's paying for an inspection pre-listing.
Oh, you mean someone's employed by a company and
Yes.
Yeah, and the company that's doing a transfer and buying a house will order an inspection. And they're not really the buyer or the seller, either one.
Aren't the sellers usually listed on that?
You're talking about a relocating?
The relocation type of event could throw a kink in that. Well, the relocation company, I guess you could consider them a buyer in some cases. Because if the house does not sell, then they will pick it up.
So they could be
You
a
show the company.
prospective buyer.
I guess they could be a prospective buyer.
So
From
that's in
the
there.
sales, from the real estate side, does that make sense? So if there's no, because that kind of ties into the scope of an inspection is when the home, there is a buy or a sale intent. of the house. If
Yeah.
there is no buyer-sell intent,
That's right.
then it doesn't come under the scope, even though we'll
Yeah.
probably use it, and there is no buyer or seller.
Right. And the scope speaks specifically to 1 to 4 family
Yeah.
residential units. I
Right.
mean, that doesn't need to be in this because it's already
No.
defined by the
Right.
scope. This is just to determine elsewhere where the term client is used, who are we talking about?
Because that 1 to 4 is tied into the home being sold.
Right,
So
correct.
if it's not being sold, then, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to make everyone, I handed out a copy of some comments by Mike Cawthron that was based on this agenda item, correct?
Yeah, this came from a larger, Mike Cawthron.
Thank you.
This came from a larger discussion on the InterNACHI program to inspect housing. I was in there.
Yeah, I know, I was just realizing.
And I appreciate you defining it, frankly, I think it needs probably to be defined too, but I wanted you to just note from a legal standpoint, the legal concept of contract for consideration needs to probably be part of this definition too, because around the table, you may have had this situation, I've had agents pay me because they think they're doing a nice job for their customer. I've had parents of the buyers pay me, and then I've had sellers pay me. And I know who my client is. It's the one I work for, and I never have any haze as to how my reporting goes, ever. But the fact of contract for consideration is one that I think needs to be involved in that, and that's who pays you is actually, from a legal standpoint, in many cases, your client, or the one you answer to, let's say.
No, not necessarily.
I don't agree with that.
Think of it in terms of insurance. You have the insurance policy and you get sued. Well, the insurance company is going to pay to defend you, but the client is the person who owns that policy. So the homeowner, the business owner, that's who the lawyer's client is that policy owner, not the insurance company, even though they're getting paid by the insurance company. So it's the same here. I mean, what we're defining is the individual that you're working for, the prospective buyer or seller, or the actual buyer or seller, not the person who is making payment to the service provider.
Because if a realtor pays you, you got a problem there. It's a conflict of interest if the realtor's paying you.
I'm just saying, I'm happy to have it defined, I really am, because I think that's something that I don't personally wrestle with as to who my allegiance stands to. But Kristen, in that scenario, then you have a claim and a potential for a litigation and lawsuit. So I would contend that that's a little bit different scenario. But in just an ordinary, every day I go do an inspection and I walk around with the buyer. I mean, there's no equivocation, I think, probably in most inspectors' minds. But legally, maybe there could be, and I'm thinking it needs to be addressed. My comment.
Thank you.
I really thought this needed to be in there because there's a number of places in our standards where we use the word client. You know, provide the report to the client within 3 days, or, you know, there's a number of places. So the question came up, who is the client? When I asked everybody, it was like whoever wrote the check. And it's like you say,
Not true. And
not always.
privacy. Yeah, privacy too.
Well, yeah, that was
Who you're
part.
going to release information to.
That was another part of the discussion last time, was this idea that, you know, there's information out there that, and privacy concerns, and you need to define who that is in order to better protect that person. So.
I run into that more in re-inspects. I couldn't access the electrical panel during the initial inspection, so they call me out for a re-inspect. Now the seller has, you know, moved everything away, and now you can actually access it. Well, the seller wants to cut you a check for that re-inspection. Well, I don't let the seller pay me for the re-inspection because then I should be obligated to give them the information if they're paying me for it. And I understand there's gray area there, but that's my personal way of seeing it. I want the seller to reimburse the buyer to pay me, because I just want the money to come from the person who's actually getting the information.
And there's times when you're probably never going to see that money.
But does this clarify that for you in this situation?
I mean, it doesn't change it for me either way, but I think it clarifies for our purposes, absolutely.
Right. For what we need it in our.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also
Disclosure.
consistent with your professional conduct and ethical obligations in 535-220.
So, do we need to make a motion to vote on this, or was this just? Okay.
Yes.
So.
And the motion would be whether or not you want to recommend this proposed rule change to the commission.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any
Was
more
that-
discussion? We're good?
You second? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so is there a vote for all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody against? Okay. So. All right, so now we have, I'm sorry. You wanted to speak on it, I missed it, I'm sorry.
No, I'm okay.
Don't wake him up.
All righty, agenda item 10, request for future meeting agenda items. I think what's going to come up is whatever comes from the working group. So what they move first, and go from there. Does anybody else have any others?
Yeah, we probably need to say.
Yeah, since the full committee's part of that, it makes sense to set a date if we
Yeah,
can.
I think we should do that. Should that be under number 11, discussion of future meeting dates?
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
is that just for this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And of the information that we've kind of agreed that staff would be able to provide some things.
So.
Do you remember what they were and how?
He's gonna pull the videos and stuff.
Yeah, well, so we're going to get some information in terms of any financial impact.
There
it
wasn't
would have.
anything that we had asked for that you think would take very long to get, so we can pick a date.
Yeah, pick a date, we'll get it for you. And if we don't, we'll get what we can for you.
Monday.
Sure.
I'm open Thursday.
Thursday?
All right.
Okay, let's see what's on the calendar.
So we were gonna see if we can do like a go-to-meeting, so we don't require everybody to drive in, but if
That's easy.
everybody thinks it'll work easier to be in one room, we can.
Well, and we have the
entertain
option through GoToMeeting to, if you have the availability on your laptop or computer, which most people do, we can do it, a face GoToMeeting. We can do video where people, I believe, let me double check, but I believe we can do that.
You can. You have the
So-
option to click on that.
Well, I just want to make sure I tracked it.
Oh, we've done it before. Yeah.
I
I
think
know,
we've
but there were a
had-
lot of hoops that we had to go through. I don't know if we have that capability any longer.
Okay, okay. I'll look into it.
We've never done it as an inspector committee, maybe.
Because it wasn't through GoToMeeting that we did that. Remember, that was a special demonstration that we did for that one commission meeting.
Yeah, but that was because for the commission, there's extra hoops that they don't have to jump through because they're an advisory committee.
We were live on inspector committee meetings.
I'll look and see. I'll provide an option for everybody. If we can do it, I'll let you know. Otherwise, we'll just
But
do it
either way,
regular.
we Facebook Live.
Right, right.
Either way, we still need a meeting date, and we'll go from there. So staff wants to attend, so we need to go around your schedules too, I suppose.
Yeah, we need to make sure if we're, and what were you thinking? What does everyone think? And then we can see if we're,
None?
I mean, do you think you could, what, couple of weeks? 3 weeks?
spring break is a bad week.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not for me.
So, are you want to do it in March? Is that what you're saying?
When is spring break?
The 12th.
The 12th through the 16th.
Of what, March?
March.
So if we did it
That's not good.
the first week of March, is that too soon?
Probably.
That's next year.
Just in
Yeah.
terms of us getting the information that's going to be useful for you
So the
guys.
second week gonna be right on the edge.
Well, that's okay. We could, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but,
Second week, spring break.
Right.
Right.
oh, the second weekend is the 12th?
Yes.
Monday the 12th.
Okay.
Yeah.
About the 26th?
26 is a Monday.
Gives everybody a week to recover from spring break.
26 is a Monday. Let me see what
Right,
that
actually.
speaks of in terms of,
26?
26th, do you guys?
We can, I mean, we can meet on Fridays too. We've done that in the past. It doesn't have to be a Monday.
Not Fridays.
I mean, if it's a
Nobody wants it.
go-to meeting, that kind of helps.
You're right, it does. You don't have to, if it's a go-to meeting, you don't have to physically be in Austin.
Right.
I mean, we'll have this room open because it's an open meeting and people can come and attend it here.
And
But
see everybody on screen.
if we can get that to work, otherwise they can hear them on the phone. But if it's a go-to meeting, the committee members don't have to worry about coming in person.
Right.
If that frees some other dates up.
I like it.
Monday, 26th.
Monday, the 26th looks good. Is
Okay.
this
How
No.
early, what time?
It's not a
What time? 10 a.m.?
tour.
Okay, perfect.
9? 9 a.m.?
Can 9 work? I know
9 would work. Could we do 9? Can we do 9:30?
TREIC doesn't, yeah, you never like to start before 10, so.
I was here at 7:15 this morning. So
Usually we do it based on your schedule.
no, it is not based on my schedule. People have to come in and stuff.
Right. I mean, if you're having people travel in and you want to get the most input, that's why the commission and the board meetings don't start until 10.
But we can do if we could do 9:30 instead of 9, that'd probably be better.
Yeah, see? Okay, let's say 9:30, March 26th.
Okay.
And then you'll send out the meeting information to everyone.
I will.
who's on the
In
line.
fact, what I will do today is I will set it up and send it out to you guys today
Oh, okay.
as an invite, and then I'll remind you as it gets
And the
closer.
commission meeting is May.
May 7th.
7.
I mean, it's unlikely that we solve the issue in one meeting.
We need an April, well, we need an April committee meeting.
We do need an April committee meeting as well. When is it? I'm sorry, you said it 3 times. When is May 7th?
7.
Oh, I wrote it down. Help if I looked at my
So
notes.
that's the 26th, which is in May, and then April.
And remember, we need to have at least 10 days prior to the commission meeting in order to process any recommendations, so the commission has that information and so they're not getting it last minute.
Another 9.
The 9th or the 16th?
The 9th is the ESAC meeting. So
Okay.
this will already be.
16th?
16th, day before other government.
April 16th is good because right after tax filing day.
I believe
there
it's
you go.
tax filing is on a Sunday. Wouldn't the 16th be the official
It
day?
is.
The
It is.
official day.
Okay.
So everybody can
For
come
some
in
reason, I have
depressed.
tax day the 17th.
We just go to the IRS.
No, everybody just come in broke.
The
Now,
16th.
yeah, that's fine.
Actually, the 23rd would work because that gives us way more than 10 days before the 7th.
We can't do the 23rd. That's the board meeting.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
16th? Okay.
Appraisers
I
board.
thought you guys were trying
So
to
all of our
send
staff
me-
will be downstairs at the board meeting.
We can just personally bring our tax.
You can't do the 16th?
I'm in backflow class.
What about the 13th, Friday?
Friday the 13th?
That seems appropriate.
Okay, You're out the 9th also.
No, I can do the 9th.
Why can't we do the 9th? That's got ESAC.
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 Is it, are we stuck on Mondays and Fridays?
I don't know. I mean, I don't care what day of the week it is unless it's a track.
If we don't have a conflict, it's open. Just know that we've been told that Sunset's going to be coming in at some point at the end of April, which is fine. I mean, we can let them know a meeting's scheduled, and maybe we even want to go attend. I don't know, but
17th?
it's Tuesday, the 17th.
Yes, Tuesday the 17th.
Do we have any conflicts?
And we have the STM that day. So we could do it that afternoon.
The STM? Yeah, or cancel it.
It won't be canceled.
Oh,
Not
well.
with it being that close to sunset.
God, why is this so hard?
I don't,
What about Friday the 6th? If y'all don't like the 13th.
Either the
13th,
20th or the 6th. How does that work with the
6th works for
track
me,
schedule?
6th.
Bueller.
I'm not
That's
ready.
getting interesting to decide about insurance.
Friday the 6th works?
Friday the 6th?
That's only about 10 days from the previous meeting. So you may want to,
But the previous meetings is the working group where they're focusing on one thing, and this would be more of a, just a general committee meeting.
oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Right, the
April
meeting on the 26th is the working group meeting, right?
Right,
So,
right.
right.
Friday the 6th, there's a full committee, inspection committee.
Perfect.
And that's good for everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
Yeah, 10 a.m., Friday
All
the
right.
6th. Wow.
Did I say that?
Okay. On that note.
Can I make an announcement
Hold
before
on.
you adjourn?
I'm sorry.
Okay, just a reminder to everybody that there are sign-out sheets separate from your sign-in sheets right at the door entry here. And if you are seeking CE credit, be sure that you sign out. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for coming. And it is 12:08, and we shall adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.